Welcome back. Part two of cost of production. This is a complicated chapter, and let me assure you that this is probably one of the most important chapters in the micro book. So that's one of the reasons we're spending so much time on it, is I do think that it's pretty important that we get a good handle on this stuff. So we left off talking about the difference between long run and short run decision making. So this is, again, all about how the business community is going to be making decisions about what they're going to produce, how much they're going to produce, how they're going to make decisions about dealing with costs, all the other questions. So typically, when we use the term short run, we're talking about a decision that can be changed relatively quickly. Long run, we're talking about something that's going to take at least 6 months or more in order to change. So let me give you an example of how that works. When I was at Eaton, the previous examples I was giving you, one of the things that was going on, they had this old plant that they were doing this work in. It was 5 stories tall, and it was relatively narrow, which meant that you couldn't finish production of anything on one floor. So you were always finishing a portion of it, bundling it up, putting on the elevator, taking it to another floor, or even worse, putting it into a truck and taking it 5 miles away to the storage facility. You know, all the way around. Lots of expense was added every time you moved this stuff. And so what they had at this plant was one elevator. So we identified the elevator as what is called a bottleneck, meaning what happens if the elevator breaks? You kind of shut down for the whole facility, just because it's so hard to get anything done in that particular arena. So is there a solution to that problem of the one elevator in the short run? No, of course not. You can't fix that. But in the long run, what can you do? Well, you could put in a second elevator. You could build a new facility. You could, there's just a whole range of things you can do in the long run as a strategy to solve that particular problem and deal with the cost that is associated with that. One of the things we do know, and this is true across, I think, almost all organizations, the more touches that a product has on it as it moves through the process before you or I pick it up at the final end stage, the more cost that's associated with it. And so if you look at, for example, Walmart, one of the advantages Walmart's had over Sears and Kmart and everybody else for years is they had few touches on those products. Those products would come from Procter & Gamble's or come from wherever, and they'd land on the shelf with only a couple touches, as opposed to Kmart, where it would land in a big warehouse and then get eventually broken down and shipped to a smaller warehouse, and eventually, and just the number of times that product was touched. So understanding how to deal with long run, short run is real important. So let's go to that question of why would Walmart or McDonald's or anybody else go to a 24-hour system? You gotta be kidding me. How many customers does Walmart have between 2 and 6 in the morning? The answer is not many. But the question is a good one from the economic side, because what additional cost does Walmart incur by being open those extra hours? Well, the building's there. It's already basically paid for. The lights, utilities are there, because what do you got? You got workers working all night restocking the shelves. So exactly, well, what additional costs do you have? Well, you probably got to have somebody at the checkout line to make sure that, the few customers that come in, so you've got one additional person or maybe 2 that would show up. I worked at Walmart for a while on the overnights, and so what they said to me when we went to 24 hours, well, we know that you're responsible for making sure all the store gets restocked, and you got to manage your people and do all that stuff, but we also want you to manage the front end too. Yeah. So what additional costs did they incur by doing that? 0, because they didn't pay me anymore to add this extra responsibility to me. So the answer is, what additional cost is associated with that? And the answer is not much. Well, you could say the same thing with McDonald's. Let me do McDonald's before I give you the flip side of that. So McDonald's, a number of years ago, was watching the other fast food places all do breakfast. And they went, well, we think breakfast is dumb. We don't think anybody will stop at McDonald's for breakfast. I mean, but okay, we'll go ahead and do it. Well, the answer was, what did they have to be open for breakfast? They had to have some specialty food products, and they had to have a couple workers. So how much additional cost did they have? Not much, because at a McDonald's, they basically cover all of their fixed costs at lunch. So everything else is basically gravy if you're thinking in terms of opportunity cost. Now, if you're doing the accountant mode where you have to make every hour have a certain profit level, then you get into trouble with that stuff. But if you assume that you're going to make all your money to cover your costs at lunch and everything else is good, you can be open for breakfast because your additional costs are so inconsequential. And it's basically almost, not quite, but almost pure profit. Let me give you the flip side of that, though. One of the Walmarts in, I think it was DeWitt, north of Lansing someplace, had been a 24-hour, and they went back to being an 18-hour Walmart. And the issue was, is you had all the kids in town that would show up at night and hang out in the parking lot. And so they caused problems for customers that were coming. They caused trash problems. They caused some vandalism. And, there were a number of issues. And so what they decided to do is that their cost that they were incurring were high enough that they decided that it wasn't economically accounting either way beneficial to be open 24 hours because you had additional costs that were showing up. I also had a friend who transferred over to the Ypsilanti Walmart, and they would only be an 18-hour Walmart also because their risk of security and other issues at night were high enough that they decided it wasn't worth it to add those additional costs to that. So again, we're looking at understanding how costs play into making decisions about what we do and how we do it. So let me slide to economy of scales. We have this basic assumption in American economics that the bigger you are as a company, the cheaper you will be able to produce products. And that is to some degree true. And then you can all kind of figure out some of the advantages. So economy of scales basically means that we're talking about buying in bulk. And obviously, if you're buying in bulk, it's going to be cheaper. You're going to be able to focus more on efficiency questions. And as you've noticed in economics, efficiency is a very, very important notion of making sure that people are on task and performing and doing all that stuff that's connected with efficiency. Now, I would actually temper that with effectiveness, but effectiveness means you're delivering what the customer wants when they want it, as opposed to us simply pushing that product out into the marketplace. But that's a different question to look at. So there's a lot of pluses to economy of scales and orchestrating the process, working with not only your vendors and your suppliers, but also the various folks who are going to sell your product out there. There's some real advantages to that. But let me also suggest that the bigger you get, there can become some diseconomy of scale. So the bigger you get, you create a whole bunch of new problems that may well show up. And so what I want to do is give you an example. And all of this stuff comes from Mike Hammer. Mike Hammer was a management guru. He died a couple years ago, but I still like his stuff. His stuff was called re-engineering. And some of it was a little screwy, but many of it was actually very interesting. So he started with a premise, and he was kind of a nasty guy, so I'll give you some of the flavor of Hammer when he did this. That if you need to produce 100 widgets per hour, and one worker can produce 10 widgets per hour, his question was, how many employees do you need? And the answer is pretty simple. You need 11, right? Okay, 11 is you got 10 workers and 1 supervisor. That's pretty simple. All right, so let's up the ante. So instead of needing 100 widgets an hour, Let's say we now need 1,000 widgets an hour. So we're talking about upping the complexity of the organization a lot. So if you got to do 1,000 widgets per hour, now how many employees do you need? Okay, so the answer is, okay, if you came up with 111, Hammer said you could at least do math, but you have no business being a manager. Okay, so 111 means you need 100 workers, 10 supervisors, and you got 10 supervisors. What do you also need? One supervisor or the supervisors. He said the real answer is 223. Why was it 223? Because when you get to this level of complexity, going from this simple organization to this complex organization, what do you now need? You now need expediters. You now need some human resource people. You now need some other ancillary folks that are performing various kinds of tasks to try and get the products moved through the system, and what Hammer called throughput, and inputs and out, all that stuff. And you end up adding all of these people that typically have nothing to do with actually performing the task. Well, Hammer went on with lots of other examples of how this works in organization after organization. And if anybody's interested, I'll pass you the information on IBM Credit, which is a classic example of how this system actually played out in real life. And so sometimes what happens as organizations get bigger and bigger, you get some advantages on buying in bulk and other kinds of efficiency questions, but sometimes the organization becomes a little unwieldy. And you also tend to have problems as you get bigger and bigger actually getting stuff out the door. And you have problems with quality because you got to have a separate quality department, and on it goes with this stuff. And so one of the reasons that I wanted to mention all this stuff is in this chapter of cost of production, we're talking about issues of how organizations end up making decisions about how much to produce, when to produce it, where to sell it, managing all of that supply side of the equation that looks like, in the charts and graphs that we have in the textbook, looks like a simple, easy process. Is it such a simple, easy process? I don't think so. And it's important to understand the real complexity that shows up here. So where we're going next is we're going to be looking at the next chunk of our text, which is looking at questions of monopolies and oligopolies and monopolistic competition and all of those varieties of how we structure the broad economy, not only in America, but obviously around the world too. Virtually everybody has the same kinds of models. So we're going to talk about some of those models and what they actually mean in the next clip of this stuff. Thank you very much.